What if I told you that three experienced investigators walked into the Montana wilderness to catch a killer, and only their bodies walked back out? I know what you are thinking. That sounds impossible. Experienced law enforcement officers do not just change, they do not cross lines, they do not become the very thing they swore to stop. But what I am about to share with you will shatter everything you believe about justice, authority, and the monsters that hide behind badges. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you would follow them into danger? Have you ever looked at a police officer and felt that surge of relief, knowing they are there to protect you? Have you ever wondered what you would become to protect the people you love? Because in this case, the line between hero and monster did not just blur, it disappeared entirely. This is not your typical true crime story. There are no clear victims here, no obvious villains, no satisfying conclusions that let you sleep peacefully at night. This is the story of three people who stared into the abyss for so long that the abyss stared back and liked what it saw. Detective Marcus Holloway had 30 years of experience, 30 years of catching killers, solving cases, bringing families closure. Dr. Rebecca Thorne could profile serial killers with terrifying accuracy, seeing patterns that others missed. Deputy Angela Reeves was young, ambitious, everything the department needed in its next generation of officers. Together, they reopened a case that had been cold for 28 years, a case that someone very powerful wanted to stay buried, a case that would transform them from hunters into prey, and then into something far worse. But here is what makes this story truly terrifying. By the end, you will question everything you believe about justice, truth, and the price of survival. You will ask yourself, when good people are pushed to their absolute limit, when they are hunted like animals, when their backs are against the wall, what are they willing to become? Before we go any further, I need you to do something for me. If you are ready to have your understanding of right and wrong completely challenged, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Criminal Mind Cortex because this channel is dedicated to exploring the darkest corners of human nature, the places where heroes and villains are separated by nothing more than a single choice. And drop a comment telling me, have you ever trusted someone who turned out to be completely different than you thought? Because trust is going to be the most dangerous weapon in this story. This case began in March of 2024, when Detective Marcus Holloway opened a file that should have stayed closed. It ended 6 months later in a forest clearing, where three investigators faced a choice that would define not just their futures, but their very souls. What happened in those woods changed everything, and I guarantee that by the time we reach the end of this story, you will never look at a police badge the same way again. The setting for this nightmare was Montana, big sky country, where endless forests stretch beyond the horizon and secrets hide in the shadows of towering pines. Here, the wilderness keeps its own laws, and civilization feels like nothing more than a thin veneer over something much more primitive. In these mountains, cell phones lose signal, GPS devices fail, help can be hours away if it comes at all. It is the perfect place for predators to hunt, for secrets to stay buried, and for good people to discover just how far they will go when everything they believe is stripped away. This is where three investigators thought they were going to catch a killer. This is where they learned that some monsters wear badges. This is where they discovered that the most dangerous predator is not the one hunting you. It is the one you become when survival is the only option left. So buckle up, because we are about to enter the heart of darkness itself. We are about to witness the moment when protectors become predators, when justice becomes vengeance, and when the thin blue line becomes a noose around the necks of the very people it was meant to protect. The hunt is about to begin. To understand how three law enforcement officers became something else entirely, you need to know who they were before the darkness found them. Because every monster has an origin story, and sometimes that story begins with the best of intentions. Detective Marcus Holloway was 54 years old when he decided to reopen the Victoria Ashford case. 30 years on the force had carved deep lines around his eyes, but it was not the job that aged him. It was the photograph he kept in his wallet. His daughter Emma, frozen forever at 16, the same age Victoria had been when someone stole her life. Emma had died in a car accident 8 years earlier. Drunk driver, wrong place, wrong time. The kind of senseless tragedy that destroys families and leaves fathers questioning everything they believe about justice. Marcus had thrown himself into work after that, solving other people's tragedies because he could not solve his own. When he looked at Victoria Ashford's crime scene photos, he did not see a case number. He saw Emma. He saw a father who never got closure. A family destroyed by unanswered questions. That connection would drive every decision he made. every risk he took, every line he would eventually cross. Dr. Rebecca Thorne arrived from Quantico with a reputation that preceded her. At 38, she had profiled over 200 serial killers, consulted on cases that made national headlines, written papers that changed how law enforcement understood criminal psychology. Rebecca believed she could see into the mind of any killer. She studied their patterns, their motivations, their psychological triggers, with the precision of a surgeon. But her greatest strength was also her fatal weakness. She was so confident in her abilities that she never considered the possibility that a killer might be studying her just as intently. Her colleagues called her brilliant. Her ex-husband called her obsessed. The truth was somewhere in between. Rebecca needed to be the smartest person in every room, needed to solve the unsolvable, needed to prove that human behavior could be predicted and controlled. That need would blind her to the one variable she never accounted for, herself. Deputy Angela Reeves was 28, ambitious, and carrying a secret that ate at her every single day. 5 years earlier, her older brother Michael had taken his own life after struggling with PTSD from his military service. The note he left behind contained a single line that haunted Angela's dreams: "I cannot live with what I have become." Angela had joined law enforcement to honor Michael's memory, to prove that protecting people was worth the cost. But she carried guilt like a stone in her chest. Guilt that she had not seen the signs. Guilt that she had not saved him. Guilt that she sometimes wondered if he had made the right choice. She was the best shot in the department, the first to volunteer for dangerous assignments, the one who never backed down from a fight. But deep down, Angela was still that scared little sister who could not save the person she loved most. That fear would make her both incredibly brave and incredibly vulnerable. Victoria Ashford was 16 when she disappeared on October 13, 1996. Honor student, church volunteer, the kind of girl who helped elderly neighbors with their groceries. She was found 3 days later by fishermen, her body arranged in a specific pose that suggested her killer had spent time with her after death. The case had consumed the original investigation team. Detective William Crane, who led the case, followed every lead, interviewed hundreds of suspects, worked 18-hour days for months. But the killer had left no fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses. The case went cold, and Victoria became another statistic, another unsolved tragedy filed away in a basement storage room. Now, 28 years later, 3 very different people had come together to give Victoria justice. Marcus, driven by grief he could not process. Rebecca, convinced she could outsmart any killer. Angela, desperate to prove she could save someone this time. But here is the question that will haunt this entire story. Which investigator would you trust with your life? The grieving father figure who let emotion cloud his judgment? The brilliant profiler who thought she was smarter than everyone else? Or the young deputy carrying secrets that could destroy her? Because at 3:17 on a Tuesday morning in March, one of them received a phone call that changed everything. The voice on the other end was calm, almost conversational, like someone calling to chat about the weather. "Detective Holloway, you have been looking into old cases. Some stones are better left unturned, some graves should stay closed." Marcus would later tell his colleagues he thought it was a prank, but the caller knew details about Victoria Ashford's murder that had never been released to the public, details that only the killer, or someone very close to the investigation, could know. The hunt was about to begin, but none of them realized they were already the prey. The phone call that changed everything came at 3:17 in the morning on Tuesday, March 15th. Marcus Holloway was at his kitchen table, surrounded by Victoria Ashford's case files, when his personal cell phone rang. Not his work phone, his personal number that only family and close friends knew. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, like someone discussing weekend plans. But the words sent ice through Marcus's veins. "Detective Holloway, you have been looking into old cases. Some stones are better left unturned. Some graves should stay closed." Marcus sat up straight, his hand instinctively reaching for his service weapon. "Who is this?" "Someone who knows you. Keep Emma's picture in your wallet. Someone who knows you visit her grave every Sunday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Someone who knows you blame yourself for not being there when she needed you most." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone, his heart pounding. How could a stranger know those details? Emma's death was not connected to any of his cases. Her grave visits were private, personal moments he shared with no one. Yet this caller knew his deepest pain, his most guarded secrets. He immediately called Dr. Rebecca Thorne. Rebecca arrived at the sheriff's office within an hour, her analytical mind already working through the implications. She spread the Victoria Ashford files across the conference table, her movements precise and clinical. "This caller demonstrates organized behavior," she explained to Marcus and Angela. "He has conducted extensive surveillance on you, Marcus. He knows your routines, your emotional triggers, your psychological vulnerabilities. This suggests a sophisticated individual with patience and resources." Angela leaned forward. "So we are dealing with someone who has been watching Marcus for weeks?" "Possibly years," Rebecca replied, making notes in her leather journal. "The level of personal detail suggests long-term observation. This person has invested significant time in understanding Detective Holloway's psychology." But Rebecca made a critical error in her analysis. She assumed the caller was reacting to their reopening of the Victoria Ashford case. She never considered that the caller might have been waiting for them to reopen it. She never questioned whether they were investigating a cold case or walking into a carefully laid trap. Marcus pulled up the phone records from that morning. The call had come from a number that did not exist. When they traced it, the signal bounced through multiple cell towers across 3 states before disappearing entirely. Whoever made that call understood technology, understood law enforcement procedures, understood how to stay invisible. "Professional-level operational security," Angela observed, studying the phone company reports. "Military or intelligence background, maybe? Someone with counter-surveillance training?" Rebecca nodded, adding more notes to her profile. "He wants us to know he is watching. This is not about hiding. This is about psychological warfare. He is trying to destabilize the investigation team before we even begin." What none of them realized was that the psychological profile Rebecca was building described the caller perfectly, but it also described the trap they were walking into. Every assumption they made, every conclusion they drew, every decision they would make, it was all part of a larger design. Over the next 3 days, more evidence emerged that someone had been monitoring their activities. Security cameras outside Marcus's house showed a figure in dark clothing on the night before the phone call. Angela's patrol car had been photographed in the department parking lot, the pictures appearing in her mailbox with no return address. Rebecca's hotel room at the Mountain View Lodge had been searched while she was at dinner. Nothing taken, but her files had been rearranged in a specific pattern. "He is studying us," Marcus realized during their 4th meeting. "The phone call, the photographs, the hotel room search. He wants us to know we are being watched. But why?" Rebecca adjusted her glasses, reviewing her notes. "Psychological dominance. He is establishing control over the investigation by making us react to his moves instead of following our own leads." Angela was cleaning her service weapon, a nervous habit she had developed since joining the investigation. "Or maybe he wants us to find him. Maybe this is all an invitation." The room fell silent. None of them wanted to consider that possibility, that they were not hunting a killer but responding to his summons. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you do if you got that 3:17 a.m. phone call? Would you back down? Or would you push forward knowing someone was watching your every move? Because these 3 investigators chose to push forward, and that choice would cost them everything they thought they knew about themselves. On Friday, March 22nd, Deputy Angela Reeves failed to check in for her evening patrol. Her last radio transmission came at 6:43 in the evening from Highway 2, near the Lincoln turnoff. Her voice sounded normal, routine, reporting an abandoned vehicle that turned out not to exist. When her patrol car was found 8 hours later, it told a story that chilled every officer who saw it. The cruiser sat perfectly positioned on a logging road 20 miles from Lincoln, Montana. Engine still running, radio crackling with dispatch calls, coffee still warm in the cup holder. Angela's service weapon remained holstered, her radio clipped to her uniform shirt. But Angela was gone. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no indication that she had been forced from the vehicle. Her body camera was missing, but the dashboard camera showed nothing, just empty forest and gathering darkness. Marcus stared at the abandoned patrol car, his mind racing through possibilities. She would not just leave her weapon behind. Angela never goes anywhere without being armed. Dr. Rebecca began her psychological analysis immediately. Voluntary departure is inconsistent with Deputy Reeves' personality profile. She exhibits strong duty-bound behavior patterns. Something or someone compelled her to leave this vehicle. The search operation consumed 72 hours. Every available officer, search and rescue teams, volunteers from 3 counties, even National Guard units with helicopters. They combed through thousands of acres of wilderness, following every trail, checking every cabin, exploring every cave and abandoned mine shaft. Marcus barely slept during those 3 days. He kept thinking about Emma, about losing another young woman to violence he could not prevent. Rebecca worked around the clock, creating psychological profiles of potential abductors, analyzing the crime scene for behavioral clues. They found Angela on Sunday morning, alive but broken. She was sitting beside Blackfoot Creek, 10 miles from where her patrol car had been discovered. No injuries, no signs of physical assault, but when the search team approached her, Angela did not respond to her name. She stared at the water, rocking back and forth, whispering words no one could understand. The hospital examination revealed nothing physically wrong with Angela. No drugs in her system, no trauma to her head or body, but psychologically, she had been shattered. Marcus and Rebecca sat beside her hospital bed, waiting for her to speak. When she finally did, her voice was barely audible. "He knew my name," she whispered. "Not Deputy Reeves, not Angela. He called me Angie. Only Michael ever called me Angie." Rebecca leaned closer. "Who called you that, Angela?" The voice in the dark. He knew about Michael. He knew what Michael wrote in his note. He knew things that no one else knows. Marcus felt his blood turn cold. What things? Angela's eyes focused on something neither of them could see. He knew that Michael did not just write, "I cannot live with what I have become." He wrote something else. Something I never told anyone. Something I tore off the note before the police saw it. "What did it say?" Rebecca asked gently. Angela's voice dropped to a whisper. It said, "Tell Angie that some monsters are born from trying to be heroes." The silence in the hospital room was deafening. Rebecca's analytical mind tried to process the implications while Marcus struggled with a growing sense of dread. "Angela," Marcus said carefully, "did you recognize the voice? Had you heard it before?" Angela nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "That is what scares me most. I think I knew that voice. I think I have been hearing it for years, and I just never realized it." She looked directly at them, her eyes filled with terror. "I think the person who took me is someone we trust." Angela's words haunted Marcus and Rebecca as they returned to the investigation with new urgency. Someone they trusted. Someone whose voice Angela recognized but could not place. Someone who knew intimate details about their personal lives. Rebecca threw herself into analyzing every piece of evidence with fresh eyes. She spread crime scene photographs across 3 tables, searching for patterns she might have missed. That was when she noticed something that made her blood freeze. In the background of Victoria Ashford's crime scene photos from 1996, barely visible among the trees, were tiny holes drilled into oak trunks. Holes that were too perfectly round, too strategically placed to be natural. "Marcus, look at this," Rebecca called out, pointing to the photographs with a trembling finger. "These holes in the trees, they are positioned at exact angles to provide optimal viewing of the crime scene." Marcus studied the photos through a magnifying glass. Camera mounts, surveillance equipment. Someone was recording the original investigation 28 years ago. They pulled photographs from the other cold cases Rebecca had connected to Victoria's murder. Case after case showed the same pattern: tiny holes in trees, disturbed earth where equipment might have been buried, vantage points that offered perfect views of investigators working. "We are not investigating murders," Rebecca realized, her voice barely above a whisper. "We are being studied. Someone has been documenting law enforcement response to serial killings for decades." Marcus felt the pieces clicking into place like a weapon being loaded. "The caller knew my routines because he has been watching me for years. He knew about Emma, about my Sunday visits to her grave, because he has been cataloging my psychological profile." "A behavioral experiment," Rebecca said, her scientific mind grasping the horrifying implications. "Using real murders as laboratory conditions to study how different types of investigators respond to different types of evidence." They were not hunters, they were subjects in someone else's research project. Marcus pulled the original Victoria Ashford case files, focusing on the lead detective's reports. Detective William Crane had been thorough, methodical, almost obsessively detailed in his documentation. He had interviewed over 300 potential suspects, followed up on every lead, worked the case for 2 years before declaring it unsolvable. Crane retired in 2010 after 35 years of service. Marcus read from the personnel file. Decorated officer, commendations for solving difficult cases, died in a hunting accident 3 years ago. Rebecca was studying Crane's photograph from his retirement ceremony. Something about his eyes bothered her. They were too sharp, too calculating for someone simply doing his job. Marcus, what if Detective Crane did not just investigate these murders? What if he committed them? That is impossible. Crane was respected, trusted. He worked these cases for years. Exactly. He worked them for years, controlling every aspect of the investigation. He decided which leads to follow, which evidence to prioritize, which suspects to eliminate. He had complete authority over what got discovered and what stayed hidden. Marcus stared at the retirement photo. But he is dead. Died in a hunting accident in 2021. Rebecca pulled up the death certificate on her laptop. Hunting accident in remote wilderness. Body found after 3 days. Identified through dental records. Cremated immediately due to advanced decomposition. Remote wilderness, Marcus repeated slowly. No witnesses. Body too damaged for visual identification. Dental records that could have been tampered with by someone with access to police evidence storage. The room went silent as they processed the implications. What if William Crane faked his death? Rebecca asked. What if he has been living in the Montana wilderness for 3 years, watching, planning, waiting for someone to reopen his cases? Marcus felt his world tilting. He would know every detail of our investigation because he designed the original case files. He would know our procedures, our protocols, our psychological weaknesses because he spent 35 years studying them. This is where it gets absolutely insane. Smash that like button if you are still with me, because what comes next will change everything you think you know about this case. The phone call, Marcus whispered. The surveillance, Angela's abduction. He has been conditioning us, training us, preparing us for something. But preparing us for what? The answer would come sooner than they expected. The trail led them to an abandoned ranger station deep in Glacier National Park, 40 miles from any marked road. Marcus and Rebecca found it by following coordinates hidden in Detective Crane's old case reports. Coordinates disguised as geographic references that meant nothing to anyone who was not looking for them. The station had been officially closed since 2008, but someone had been maintaining it. Solar panels powered a sophisticated computer system. Radio equipment monitored police frequencies across 3 states, and the walls told a story more disturbing than any crime scene they had ever witnessed. Photographs covered every surface, not crime scene photos, pictures of investigators, hundreds of them. Marcus recognized faces from cases spanning 20 years, FBI profilers, local detectives, forensic specialists, all captured without their knowledge as they worked murder scenes. But these were not random surveillance photos. They were catalogued, organized, annotated with detailed psychological observations written in Crane's precise handwriting. Rebecca found herself staring at her own photograph taken during a case in Seattle 3 years earlier. Below it, Crane had written, "Subject exhibits classic profiler narcissism. Believes superior intellect grants immunity to psychological manipulation. Confidence level inversely correlates with actual situational awareness." Marcus discovered a filing cabinet containing detailed dossiers on dozens of law enforcement officers. His own file was 3 inches thick, documenting everything from his coffee preferences to his daughter's death, complete with psychological analysis of his grief responses. "He has been building a database," Rebecca whispered, horror creeping into her voice. 28 years of studying how investigators think, how they react, how they can be controlled. At the center of the station sat Crane's journal, bound in leather and filled with meticulous observations. Rebecca read aloud from entries that made their skin crawl. March 18th, 2024. Subject A responds predictably to emotional triggers. Mention of deceased daughter increases obsessive behavior by 40%. Recommend escalating personal threats to maximize psychological pressure. March 20th, 2024. Subject B exhibits textbook profiler arrogance. Believes she can predict killer behavior while remaining blind to her own manipulation. Her need to be the smartest person in every situation creates exploitable blind spots. March 21st, 2024. Subject C carries unresolved trauma regarding brother's suicide. Guilt responses can be triggered through specific verbal cues related to failure to protect loved ones. Most psychologically vulnerable of the 3 subjects. Marcus felt sick. "We are not investigators to him. We are lab rats." Rebecca continued reading, her voice shaking. The beauty of using real murders as experimental conditions is that subjects invest emotionally in outcomes. Unlike controlled laboratory environments, field subjects exhibit authentic stress responses when they believe lives depend on their actions. Each case provides data on different investigator types, Veteran officers driven by personal loss, academic profilers motivated by intellectual superiority, young officers compensating for perceived failures. By studying their responses to carefully crafted scenarios, I have developed comprehensive psychological profiles of law enforcement personality types. The Victoria Ashford reopening presents an ideal opportunity to test refined manipulation techniques on a diverse subject group. Hypothesis: properly applied psychological pressure will cause subjects to abandon professional protocols and exhibit increasingly desperate behavior patterns. Marcus slammed the journal shut. He murdered Victoria Ashford to create a case he could study. He killed those other victims to generate more data. 28 years of murder disguised as research. Rebecca was examining computer files that showed Crane's expanding operation. He has subjects in 7 states now, active cases where he is manipulating investigations, studying responses, refining his techniques. We are not the first, Marcus realized. We are just the latest test group. The worst part was not discovering they had been manipulated. The worst part was realizing how completely they had played into Crane's expectations, how predictably they had reacted to his carefully planned stimuli. They were not hunting a killer. They were performing in his experiment. And the final phase was about to begin. The coordinates in Crane's journal led them to a clearing 12 miles deep in the Absaroka wilderness. Marcus, Rebecca, and Angela, who had insisted on joining them despite her ordeal, arrived as the sun was setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows through the pine trees. Crane was waiting for them. He looked older than his retirement photos, but his eyes held the same calculating intelligence that had fooled colleagues for 35 years. He sat calmly on a fallen log, hands visible, no weapons in sight. He smiled when he saw them approach. "Right on schedule," he said, checking his watch. 6:47 in the evening. "I predicted you would arrive between 6:30 and 7 o'clock. Psychological predictability is fascinating, is it not?" Marcus had his weapon drawn, but not aimed. "William Crane, you are under arrest for the murders of Victoria Ashford and 6 other victims." Crane laughed, a sound that echoed strangely in the forest silence. Detective Holloway, still thinking like a police officer, still believing in arrests and trials and justice. After everything you have learned about me, you still think this ends with handcuffs? Rebecca stepped forward, her profiler instincts engaged despite her fear. "You want to explain your research. You want recognition for your work. That is why you brought us here." "Partially correct, Dr. Thorne, but you are missing the larger purpose." Crane stood slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. "I brought you here to complete the experiment, to see what you become when all your civilized pretenses are stripped away." Angela's hand moved to her service weapon. "What are you talking about?" "Look around you, Deputy Reeves. We are 12 miles from the nearest road. No cell phone coverage, no GPS signal, no backup coming. Just the 4 of us in the wilderness where anything can happen." Crane reached into his jacket pocket, causing all 3 officers to tense, but he only pulled out a small recording device. "I have documented evidence of corruption in 3 police departments. Recordings of cover-ups, falsified evidence, innocent people framed for crimes they did not commit, evidence that would destroy dozens of careers and overturn hundreds of convictions." He held up the device. "This contains enough information to bring down the entire regional law enforcement structure. Judges, prosecutors, police chiefs, all implicated in a conspiracy of silence that has lasted decades." Marcus felt the trap closing around them. "What do you want?" "I want to see what you choose," Crane replied. "You can arrest me, take me back, let the system process me through courts that I can prove are corrupt. Watch me walk free while this evidence disappears into bureaucratic cover-ups." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "Or you can do what needs to be done. What you know in your hearts is the only real justice. What your oath as officers really demands when the system fails." The forest went silent, except for the sound of wind through pine needles. 3 law enforcement officers stood facing a mass murderer who held evidence that could destroy their entire profession. 10 minutes. That was how long the confrontation lasted, according to official reports. 10 minutes that would define not just their futures, but their souls. What happened in those 10 minutes would remain their secret forever. When backup finally arrived 3 hours later, they found a very different scene than what had been reported. The official report filed by Detective Marcus Holloway was exactly 3 pages long. It stated that William Crane had suffered a fatal heart attack during questioning. Dr. Rebecca Thorne's psychological evaluation supported this conclusion. Deputy Angela Reeves corroborated their account in every detail. But those who knew them noticed the changes immediately. Marcus returned to work after a week of administrative leave, but he was different. Colleagues described him as hollow, going through the motions of police work without the passion that had driven him for 30 years. He stopped visiting Emma's grave on Sundays. He started drinking alone at home, staring at case files he never seemed to finish. His captain offered counseling. Marcus declined. His partner suggested vacation time. Marcus refused. When asked directly about the Crane confrontation, Marcus would simply say, "Justice was served," and change the subject. Rebecca Thorne submitted her resignation to the FBI 6 weeks after returning from Montana. Her official reason was burnout, but agents who worked with her noticed she had lost something essential: her ability to think like a killer. Her profiles became generic, cautious, lacking the psychological insight that had made her reputation. She moved to Oregon, opened a private practice treating trauma victims. Her former colleagues said she seemed afraid of her own analytical abilities, as if she no longer trusted what she might discover about human nature. Deputy Angela Reeves transferred to a desk position in Helena, citing health concerns related to her abduction. But the real reason was simpler. She could no longer work crime scenes. The sight of blood, the sound of violence, even routine domestic disturbance calls would send her into panic attacks. She developed obsessive checking behaviors, constantly looking over her shoulder, as if expecting to find someone watching. Her apartment was equipped with multiple security systems. She changed her phone number every few months and refused to establish predictable routines. The most disturbing detail was that all three had developed the same nervous habit. They would unconsciously touch their service weapons whenever someone asked about the Crane case, as if reassuring themselves the weapons were still there. Internal Affairs conducted a routine investigation into Crane's death. The medical examiner confirmed heart failure. The scene showed no signs of struggle. All physical evidence supported the official account. But there were inconsistencies that bothered investigators. Marcus claimed Crane had been standing when he collapsed, but the body was found sitting against a tree. Rebecca stated that Crane had been alone, but Angela mentioned seeing movement in the forest during the confrontation. Angela insisted they had called for backup immediately, but radio logs showed a 40-minute delay. Small discrepancies, probably meaningless, the kind of details that get confused during traumatic events. What do you think really happened in that forest? 3 experienced officers, 1 mass murderer, and 10 minutes that changed everything. Because the truth about justice is not always found in official reports. But there was one piece of evidence that was never included in any official report. Angela's body camera had been damaged during her abduction, or so they claimed. The footage from that night in the forest was corrupted, unrecoverable, except for 18 seconds of audio that survived on the device's backup memory. Crane's voice, clear and calm. "You think you have won. You think this ends with me. Look in the mirror, investigators. Look closely. Because the monster you have been hunting, the monster you have become, it is staring right back at you." Then Angela's voice, barely a whisper. "Do it." Static. Silence. Nothing more. 3 months after the incident, a security camera at a truck stop near Kalispell captured footage of 3 figures walking together in the pre-dawn darkness. The timestamp showed 2:37 in the morning. The figures moved with purpose, their faces hidden beneath hooded jackets. They purchased supplies, cash only, no words exchanged with the clerk. They returned to a vehicle parked outside the camera's range and disappeared into the Montana night. The clerk later told police they moved like law enforcement officers, alert, coordinated, watching each other's backs. But there was something else, something that bothered him enough to call the authorities. "They moved like predators," he reported, "like people who had learned to hunt." The Montana State Police declined to comment on whether they had identified the 3 figures. All requests for information about the Crane case are met with the same response: "The case is closed, justice was served." But late at night, when the wind carries whispers through the pine trees, some people claim they can still hear Crane's final words echoing in the wilderness. "The monster you have become, it is staring right back at you." If you have made it this far, you are part of something special. Hit that like button, subscribe to Criminal Mind Cortex, and drop a comment with your theory about what really happened in that forest clearing. Share this video with anyone brave enough to question what justice really looks like when civilization falls away and only survival remains. Because some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud, but too important to forget.